Just 4 minutes ago, a private message reached King Charles, turning an already fragile royal disagreement into something deeply personal. Meghan had not simply asked for permission to return to royal life. She had presented herself using a title connected to Princess Diana, one the palace had deliberately banned from being used by anyone. Charles read the wording twice, set the message down, and immediately demanded to know who had allowed it to reach the palace. Before anyone could answer, his anger was already visible. Meghan had spent years away from the working monarchy, yet every suggestion of a return unsettled the royal family. This time, the request carried the phrase Diana's royal successor, a description Charles believed no one had the right to claim. To him, it was not just a breach of palace protocol, but an attempt to turn Diana's memory into leverage during negotiations over status, security, and influence. The proposal went much further than a symbolic title. Meghan requested entry to Windsor, a public appearance with senior royals, restored security arrangements, and recognition as a natural continuation of Diana's humanitarian mission. Charles removed his glasses, placed them beside the document, and calmly declared that the title would never enter the royal family. He immediately ordered palace officials to trace everyone involved in handling the request, questioning whether Harry had approved the wording or whether someone inside the royal household had encouraged it. Before any official response could be prepared, William received the exact text. He read the forbidden phrase, closed the file, and requested an immediate meeting with his father. Charles had rejected the words as king, but William was preparing to face them as Diana's eldest son. Behind that single title stood three very different perspectives. Charles remembered the painful collapse of his marriage to Diana. William guarded the memory of the mother he had loved and lost. Meghan saw Diana as a symbol of survival, independence, and resistance against royal pressure. Their conflicting views transformed the issue into something much larger than a discussion about royal duties. It became a struggle over who had the right to define Diana's legacy. Charles believed Meghan's comparison threatened both his private emotions and the public order he was responsible for protecting. Meghan, however, believed she had endured many of the same hardships Diana had faced and viewed the title as recognition rather than theft. William rejected that reasoning completely. To him, Diana's legacy belonged to no institution, and certainly not to anyone seeking a path back into royal life. Harry found himself caught between the two sides. He understood why Meghan compared herself to Diana because he had witnessed the intense public pressure she endured. Yet he also knew how fiercely William protected their mother's memory. Camilla quietly advised Charles not to react too quickly, warning that a harsh rejection might turn the forbidden title into a symbol of defiance. Charles listened but remained unmoved. Unknown to Meghan, both Charles and William had already reached the same conclusion. The controversial phrase had not appeared out of nowhere. Months earlier, during a private planning meeting for a Diana Memorial Initiative at Kensington Palace, Meghan had suggested becoming part of a program supporting causes closely associated with Diana. She believed her humanitarian work aligned naturally with those efforts and hoped the initiative could become a bridge toward reconciliation with the royal family. William saw the proposal very differently. He knew Diana's name carried enormous emotional influence and feared that presenting anyone as a continuation would transform her memory into something that could be inherited. During the closed meeting, a senior courtier began reading Meghan's proposal aloud, describing her as a possible modern continuation of Diana's compassionate mission. Before the sentence was completed, William stopped the reading. Calm but unmistakably firm, he declared that no living member of the family, not Meghan, not Catherine, not even Diana's own sons, would ever be presented as her successor. Meghan felt the refusal as a devastating rejection, believing the palace wanted to control Diana's image while preventing anyone else from carrying it forward. William believed he had protected his mother from becoming a symbolic position others could claim. The disagreement hardened into a permanent divide. Soon afterwards, Charles formally approved a private restriction banning phrases such as Diana's successor, Diana's heir, and the new Diana from official negotiations, ceremonial descriptions, invitations, or royal programs. The instruction was final and confidential. Yet Meghan had now used the exact phrase the king had prohibited. What had begun as a rejected proposal was rapidly turning into a direct confrontation over memory, authority, and the limits the monarchy refused to cross. The confrontation took place behind closed doors, without cameras, speeches, or royal ceremony. Meghan entered believing she could persuade the palace to discuss her return. Charles entered determined to end the matter before the forbidden title gained any legitimacy. Between them lay a single printed request containing Diana's name. For several moments neither of them touched it. Finally, Charles slid the document across the table and asked Meghan why she had chosen to use a title he had personally forbidden. Meghan explained that her request was about family reconciliation rather than a permanent restoration of royal status, believing the restricted private meeting gave her room to negotiate. Charles viewed the meeting very differently. To him, it removed every possible misunderstanding. He wanted to hear directly whether the title had been carefully chosen or whether it had simply been used without understanding its consequences. Meghan answered without hesitation. She said the phrase represented survival, courage, and resistance against the same institutional pressures Diana had once endured. Charles pointed to the words Diana's royal successor and calmly replied that suffering inside the royal family did not entitle anyone to inherit Diana's identity. Meghan insisted she was not claiming Diana's place, but continuing the same struggle against public hostility, isolation, and a system that often failed to protect vulnerable women. Charles' restraint slowly faded. He accused Meghan of turning personal pain into a tool whenever she wanted access, influence, sympathy, or restored security. Meghan answered that the palace labeled every challenge as manipulation because it feared losing control over its own narrative. The exchange became increasingly emotional as years of unresolved tension surfaced between them. The discussion reached its breaking point when Meghan pushed the document back across the table and refused to remove the title unless the palace agreed to consider her wider conditions. Charles remained standing, closed the folder, placed his hand firmly on top of it, and declared the meeting finished. Meghan then revealed something the king had not expected. A public version of the proposal had already been prepared. If negotiations failed, the forbidden title could soon appear outside palace walls as part of a wider campaign connected to her return and to Diana's legacy. Charles immediately warned that any public use of the phrase would trigger an official royal response, making it absolutely clear that no connection existed between Meghan's position and Diana's legacy. He opened the door, stepped aside, and ended the meeting. Waiting outside, however, was William, determined to speak before Meghan left. The atmosphere in the corridor was even more tense than inside the meeting room. William stood alone, carrying no briefing papers and accompanied by no advisers. Meghan stopped as soon as she saw him. For years, disagreement between them had unfolded through interviews, public statements, and intermediaries. Now they face each other directly, with nothing standing between them except years of unresolved history. William needed no crown to command authority. Charles ruled as king, but William possessed something no institution could give or take away, the emotional right of a son defending his mother's memory. Meghan also realized another uncomfortable truth. No future return to royal life could succeed if William refused family appearances, charitable cooperation, or access to the household he shared with Catherine. William calmly informed Meghan that he would never support any arrangement connecting her return with Diana's charities, residences, ceremonial symbols, public legacy, or humanitarian work. His voice remained controlled, but the emotion beneath his words was unmistakable. He reminded Meghan that Diana had been his mother long before she became a global icon. He remembered her as a person rather than a title. Meghan replied that he did not own Diana's message or the exclusive right to relate to her suffering. She argued that pain was not reserved for princes and that another woman could experience similar isolation and public cruelty. William did not deny Meghan's experiences. Instead, he rejected the conclusion she had drawn from them. Shared suffering, he explained, could create understanding but could never create a royal title or justify claiming symbolic succession to Diana's legacy. The conversation ended quietly but decisively. William reached toward the folder Meghan carried, removed her palace visitor pass, and placed it on a nearby table. The gesture was small, yet its meaning could not have been clearer. The discussion had moved beyond negotiation. Meghan was now being excluded from the process altogether. William then revealed that he had already ordered a comprehensive review covering every royal foundation, speech, commercial agreement, and public project where Meghan's name might appear alongside Diana's. Meghan realized this was no longer simply one emotional disagreement. The entire royal institution was responding. Within hours, her request disappeared from the list of matters under consideration. Planned charitable meetings were cancelled, a proposed Windsor visit was removed, and officials were instructed that no appearance involving Meghan could be described as royal, semi-royal, or connected to Diana's historic role. Charles reinforced those actions by issuing a formal directive stating that Meghan held no ceremonial, constitutional, or representative connection to Diana's former position, while making it equally clear that private family contact could continue but official duties, titles, security privileges, and public roles would not be reopened. The consequences followed almost immediately. Meghan's proposed visit to Windsor disappeared from the royal calendar. Her planned appearance connected to Diana's charitable work was rejected. The security review ended before it truly began, and her request to participate in the Diana Memorial Initiative was formally removed from consideration. What Meghan had described as an effort toward reconciliation was now viewed inside the palace as an attempt to regain royal influence through emotional pressure. Sitting quietly in a private room, Meghan read the final decision twice before lowering the letter and telling Harry that the palace had chosen punishment over reconciliation. Harry heard the hurt in her voice, yet he also recognized a difficult truth. William had already drawn a clear boundary, and the forbidden title had crossed it openly. Torn between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to his mother's memory, Harry struggled to defend Meghan while also understanding why William believed Diana's name had been used as leverage. Meghan noticed his hesitation immediately. To her, his silence felt like surrender. To Harry, it felt like the first honest acknowledgement that not every conflict could simply be blamed on palace hostility. Charles himself found no satisfaction in the outcome. After signing the directive, he remained seated alone, staring at the document he had just approved. He believed he had protected Diana's memory, but he also knew the decision would push Harry even further away from a family. The institutional problem had been resolved, yet the emotional divide remained untouched. Soon afterwards, palace officials uncovered something even more alarming. An internal briefing revealed that a public announcement using the forbidden title had already been drafted and quietly circulated among a small communication circle. Meghan now faced one final choice: release a statement and begin an open public conflict, or withdraw the title and accept that her attempt to return to royal life had failed. Before any decision was made, Harry asked for one private conversation with his wife. With advisors gone and the palace removed from the discussion, they were finally left alone to confront what the title had truly cost them. Harry placed a prepared statement on the table between them and admitted what he had avoided saying for so long. Supporting Meghan, he explained, did not require him to accept that she had become Diana's successor. Meghan heard those words as a painful betrayal. For years, Harry had defended comparisons between the two women because he genuinely believed they had experienced similar pressure, isolation, media scrutiny, and emotional hardship. Yet the confrontation with Charles and William had forced him to recognize an important difference between sharing Diana's suffering and claiming her symbolic identity. Harry quietly told Meghan that the title had to be removed and that the public announcement could never be released. Another public statement, he warned, would deepen William's anger, wound Charles even further, and once again placed Diana's name at the center of battle that no one in the family could truly win. Meghan struggled to accept his decision. She insisted that the title represented survival rather than ambition, and questioned why Harry had defended those comparisons for years only to reject them now that the palace had reacted so strongly. Harry answered honestly. Diana's memory, he said, had become the battlefield on which every disagreement within the family eventually ended. Every interview, every rejection, every dispute over security or status always returned to his mother. He could no longer allow her name to become the center of another conflict. Supporting Meghan, he explained, now meant protecting the future they hoped to build together rather than endlessly reliving the past. After a long silence, Meghan slowly reached for the prepared statement. She looked at the forbidden title one final time before tearing the first page in half. Harry reached across the table and gently held her hand. Neither celebrated the decision. Instead, the anger between them gave way to a quieter sadness. Meghan admitted that part of her desire to return had come from a need to prove that leaving the monarchy had not erased her importance. Harry confessed that constantly measuring every hardship against Diana's life had trapped them inside the very royal story they had once hoped to escape. Although Meghan withdrew the title and Harry fully supported that decision, the damage had already spread beyond the palace. The announcement itself was never released, but news of the rejected proposal quickly reached broadcasters, commentators, and newspaper editors. By the following morning, Diana's name dominated headlines across the country. Television programs interrupted their schedules as commentators debated who truly had the right to define Diana's legacy. Meghan's supporters argued that the rejected title symbolized another woman's silence by royal power. Others believed it represented an unforgivable attempt to claim the identity of a princess who could never be replaced. Kensington Palace became the emotional center of the controversy after fragments of the proposal reached the media. In response, the palace issued a carefully worded statement declaring that Diana's identity and former position could not be transferred, inherited, assigned, or used during negotiations over royal status. A major newspaper intensified the debate with a striking front page showing Diana beside Meghan beneath 5 powerful words: "A legacy, not a title." The image immediately divided public opinion. Outside Kensington Palace, mourners placed white roses beside Diana's memorial gate, while one handwritten message captured the mood of many observers: "Let her be remembered, not replaced." The public reaction quickly grew more intense. Meghan supporters argued that the monarchy still decided which women were allowed to shape history and which voices were pushed aside. To them, the rejected title represented far more than personal ambition. It symbolized continuing struggle between personal truth and royal authority. William, however, watched the unfolding media coverage with no feeling of triumph. Although he believed he had protected his mother's memory, Diana had once again become the center of a painful national argument. Charles also faced increasing pressure to issue a stronger public statement. After receiving confirmation through an internal palace briefing that Meghan had withdrawn the title and cancelled the planned announcement, the king chose a quieter path. He decided the palace would acknowledge the withdrawal privately rather than publicly humiliating Harry. The public had already taken sides, and Charles believed the family needed closure more than another battle. Quietly, he prepared one final decision: not to reward Meghan, but to end the dispute permanently. The resolution arrived without ceremony. Charles ruled that there would be no restored royal position, no Diana-linked title, no Windsor appearance, and no campaign of public retaliation. He signed a brief written decision officially closing Meghan's request once the forbidden wording had been withdrawn. The king had entered the crisis with anger, but he ended it with restraint. Diana's memory, he believed, could only be protected by refusing to let anyone claim ownership of it. The decision permanently rejected Meghan's proposed return under any title, role, or public identity connected to Diana. It also created a clear distinction between private family relationships and official royal status. Harry could continue speaking with his father as a son, but no future conversation would reopen security arrangements, ceremonial privileges, public duties, or influence based upon Diana's name. Charles felt no satisfaction as he read the final page. His emotions had never been driven solely by palace protocol. They were rooted in decades of regret, public criticism, and unresolved guilt surrounding Diana's life and death. By refusing to issue a harsher public rebuke, he believed he had defended her memory without using Meghan's failure to embarrass Harry before the world. For Meghan, the final decision brought an uncomfortable truth. The forbidden title could never provide the validation she had hoped for, nor could it prove that leaving the monarchy had failed to erase her significance. Her attempt to force a symbolic return had collapsed completely. Yet by withdrawing the planned announcement, she had at least prevented the setback from defining every chapter of her future. Harry also reached an important personal conclusion. Supporting Meghan no longer meant repeating every aspect of Diana's story or viewing every disagreement with the palace through the lens of his mother's suffering. William, meanwhile, achieved the boundary he had fought to establish. In his eyes, Diana's memory would never become a position the palace could award or another person could inherit. When Charles closed the final folder and carefully returned his pen to its case, he instructed palace staff to remove Diana's name from every document connected to the failed negotiation. No one objected. The review was complete. The request had been closed, and the matter was officially over. Although the palace considered the issue settled, its emotional impact remained impossible to ignore. Meghan's proposed title had not reopened the royal door. Instead, it had demonstrated why any attempt to return based upon comparison, inherited pain, or symbolic pressure could never succeed. Royal positions might change, titles might pass from one generation to another, and public opinion might constantly shift. Personal memory, however, could never become a source of authority. Diana's legacy did not belong solely to Charles, William, Meghan, Harry, or even the institution itself. It survived through the lives she had touched, the humanitarian work she inspired, and the lasting memories carried by her sons. That understanding ultimately became the strongest argument against the title itself. No official recognition, symbolic role, or carefully chosen description could replace the emotional place Diana continued to occupy in the hearts of millions. The forbidden title had finally been withdrawn, and the palace doors remained firmly closed. The long dispute over who could ever succeed Princess Diana ended with a conclusion that neither side had fully expected, but both were ultimately forced to accept. There would be no successor because Diana's place had never been an office that could be inherited. It had been created through her own life, her compassion, and the unique connection she formed with people around the world. As the final documents were filed away and the crisis faded from official discussion, nothing remained to negotiate and no title remained powerful enough to reopen the door that had now closed for good. The monarchy moved forward. The family carried its private scars, and Diana's legacy remained exactly where it always belonged, not in a title claimed by another person, but in a memory that no one could ever replace. The days that followed brought a quieter atmosphere, but not a complete sense of peace. Inside the palace, officials gradually closed every file connected to Meghan's proposal, ensuring that no remaining documents referred to the forbidden title. Staff members who had been involved in reviewing the request were instructed that the matter was finished and would not be reopened. Charles privately hoped the decision would allow the family to move beyond another painful chapter, even though he understood the emotional consequences would linger. William returned to his royal duties convinced he had fulfilled his responsibility as Diana's eldest son. Protecting her memory had always mattered more to him than winning any public argument. Harry, meanwhile, carried the weight of two loyalties that could never fully exist together. He remained devoted to Meghan, yet he also accepted that his mother's legacy could not become the foundation for future negotiations with the monarchy. Meghan herself reflected on everything that had happened and slowly recognized that no title, however symbolic, could restore what had already been lost. Outside the palace, debate continued for some time. Television discussions, newspaper editorials, and online conversations questioned whether the monarchy had acted fairly or whether Meghan's intentions had been misunderstood. Some believed she had sincerely hoped to honor Diana's humanitarian example. Others insisted that even an emotional comparison crossed a line that should never have been approached. Yet as public attention gradually shifted to new events, the intensity of the controversy began to fade. The white flowers placed outside Kensington Palace eventually disappeared, but the handwritten messages left behind continued to remind visitors that Diana's influence remained deeply personal to countless people. For many observers, the crisis had reinforced a simple truth. Memories could inspire future generations, but they could never be transferred from one individual to another through titles or public declarations. Within the royal family, no formal reconciliation followed. Charles maintained a distinction between private family relationships and official royal responsibilities. William remained firm that Diana's name should never become part of any future negotiation involving status or influence. Harry chose to focus on his own family rather than continue revisiting old disputes, while Meghan gradually accepted that any future path would have to be built on her own identity rather than comparisons with the past. The painful disagreement had exposed long-standing wounds on every side, but it had also forced each person to confront difficult truths about grief, memory, and responsibility. Although no one emerged feeling victorious, each had reached a clearer understanding of the boundaries that could not be crossed. In the end, the story was never truly about a single title. It was about how different people carried the same history in very different ways. Charles saw Diana through the burden of regret. William remembered her as his mother before she became an icon. Harry struggled to balance his devotion to his wife with his lifelong connection to Diana's memory. Meghan believed her own experiences reflected many of the hardships Diana had endured, even if others rejected that comparison. Those perspectives could never fully be reconciled because they were shaped by different lives, different losses, and different responsibilities. What united them, however, was a recognition that Diana's legacy remained uniquely her own. The final chapter closed quietly. No dramatic announcement followed, no royal return took place, and no symbolic title altered the future of the monarchy. The palace moved forward with its wake, the family continued carrying its private burdens, and Diana's memory remained untouched by official decisions or public campaigns. The forbidden title disappeared from discussion, but the lesson behind the controversy endured. Royal positions may change with time, public opinion may rise and fall, and generations may succeed one another, yet some legacies cannot be inherited because they were never meant to belong to anyone else. Diana's compassion, influence, and place in history remained uniquely hers. And with that understanding, the door to this chapter finally closed, leaving behind not a new successor, but a lasting reminder that some memories are preserved not through titles, but through the lives they continue to inspire. As the controversy faded from the headlines, the palace quietly resumed its normal routine. Official engagements continued, charitable events moved forward, and attention gradually shifted to new royal matters. Yet those closest to the situation understood that the disagreement had left a lasting emotional mark. Charles had protected what he believed was an important principle, but he had also accepted that doing so came at the cost of an even greater distance between himself and Harry. William believed he had fulfilled his duty as Diana's son, ensuring that a memory could never become something assigned, inherited, or negotiated. Harry chose to stop measuring every disagreement against his mother's past, recognizing that his family's future could not be built by reliving old wounds. Meghan, after withdrawing the title, was left to consider a difficult reality, that personal recognition could never be secured through comparisons with someone whose place in history was entirely unique. The final outcome was not defined by victory or defeat. No one received everything they wanted, and no relationship was completely repaired. Instead, each member of the family walked away carrying a different lesson. Charles learned that authority could resolve institutional disputes but could not heal personal heartbreak. William proved that some boundaries were worth defending regardless of public opinion. Harry realized that honoring Diana's memory meant protecting it from becoming the center of every future conflict. Meghan came to understand that her own story would always be strongest when it stood on its own rather than beside someone else's legacy. Although their perspectives remained different, they all reached the same unavoidable conclusion. Diana's place in history was not something that could ever be passed from one person to another. The palace formally closed the matter, archived the remaining documents, and removed the disputed wording from every official record connected to the proposal. Future discussions involving Harry and Meghan would continue only as private family matters, completely separate from questions of official status, public duties, ceremonial privileges, or royal representation. With that decision, the institution made clear that the issue had reached its final conclusion. There would be no further negotiations, no symbolic compromise, and no reconsideration of the request. The door that had briefly reopened was now closed once again. In the end, the controversy revealed something far greater than a disagreement over title. It showed how memory, grief, duty, and identity can shape people in profoundly different ways. Royal roles may evolve, generations may change, and public opinion may shift with time, but some legacies exist beyond institutions and beyond politics. Princess Diana's influence continued not because of titles or official recognition, but because of the compassion she showed and the lives she touched. That legacy belonged to history itself, not to any individual seeking to inherit it. The forbidden title disappeared, the negotiations ended, and the royal family moved forward. But one truth remained unchanged. No title could ever replace Diana, no comparison could ever recreate her story, and no successor could ever truly take her place. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.